narrative stories probably about 12, 13 years ago, and learned a lot, and I'm excited to share it with you. So before I go any further, though, I want to show you a few of my commercials that I've produced. Each one of these tell a little 30-second story, so I want you to pay attention to that. Also, one of these was made when Jackson was in first grade, so if you look carefully, you're going to see what he looked like when he was 6 years old. It is totally necessary.
And the United States Marines give kids in your area a better Christmas.
This is why I love Jake's Barbecue so much. Everything's made from home recipes, Wright, Marie's Kitchen, and fresh vegetables every day. I don't get these at home, and there's nothing like Jake's Barbecue straight off the grill. You know what? Some Jake's Barbecue would taste good right now. Jake's Barbecue on Montevallo Road. The taste you've been dreaming of.
We all call the water
Stop right
to
there.
carry a home. But what makes a home?
Did you know politely distancing yourself from others lessens the spread of germs and illness? Allowing 3 to 4 feet of personal space effectively decreases germ sharing. So does avoiding crowded places and replacing a handshake or a hug with a wave, nod, or a smile. When dining, remember not to share cups, dishes, or eating utensils. And most importantly, stay home and avoid face-to-face contact if you are sick. Keeping your distance can help everyone stay healthy.
Come see us at Coffee Body Shop for all your collision repair needs. And remember,
All right, so how you like that, Jackson? Was that good? Okay, so I am here today, though, to talk about narrative writing. I want to try to get to as fast as I can. I got a lot I want to cover. I'm going to have to blaze through it super fast. But please, I hope this sparks curiosity, sparks questions and comments. I'll try to leave room at the end. And if I don't get to it, I encourage you all to kind of reach out to me whichever way you can find me later, because this is my favorite stuff to talk about in the whole world. So before I wrote novels, I had to figure out what I was doing. So I studied story structure, and one of the easiest ways for me to do that was to study short stories and then start applying it in short stories. These are a few of the anthologies that have been published by 3 different publishers that include stories from me. So this shows my first real published writing where I actually got paid some money for it. And the idea that someone was spending money to read stories that I'd written, that was pretty cool. So I started out in probably 2006, 2007 writing these short stories, figuring out how to write. The story I wanted to write in my novel, I've written a series of 3 novels called Galahad's Doom. I'm going to be talking about that throughout the day. So that story was important enough to me that I wanted to get it right. I didn't want to make my mistakes writing that story because that was the story I wanted to tell. So everybody says you got to write a bunch of bad stories first before you write your good one. I wanted to get that out of the way first. And I went through that process with short stories. And then, it ended up with some that I liked, some I submitted. And these are the ones that got selected. So these are all available on Amazon, but my story is just one in a collection in each of these books, and I'm not going to sit here and vouch for the quality, the Christian quality of any of those other stories. What I will tell you, though, is that once all these publishing rights get reverted to me, I'll be collecting all of my work into a single volume, and I'll be a little bit more comfortable endorsing that for people. So before we go any further, let me see here. The novel series I wrote is called Galahad's Doom. The first book is called My Brother's Keeper. The second one is called Marching As to War. They've both been published. They're both available now. The third book I just finished writing this summer. I'm super excited about it. It's called The Armor of God, and it completes the series. So I'm really excited to be able to share all of that with you. All I can do is share with you my experience, which is in writing these stories, and hopefully along the way, encourage you to use your writing as a way to not only strengthen your walk with God, but to use it as a tool for witness. So I would encourage you that even if you're not writing explicitly Christian stories, I would encourage you to, at the very least, write stories that are not in opposition to Scripture and that don't hurt your testimony. And I've endeavored to use this platform of mine to actually spread a gospel message. So it's not that you necessarily have to do that, but I would say you don't want to write anything or be associated with anything that's going to hurt your testimony. And so everything I'm going to talk about today is kind of the secrets of storytelling, kind of the code of story structure of what you need to do to tell good stories that hold together well and keep a reader's interest to the end and they feel like they got a real story and they enjoyed it and it wasn't a waste of their time. These things I'm going to go over today apply to anybody with any kind of story, but I would say use your powers for good and only associate yourself with things that are going to affirm Scripture and honor God. And that's what I try to do, and I hope that everybody else would do the same. So, 8 elements of story. Every complete story answers 6 questions. Who, what, when, where, and why, and how. Those are your 6 basic questions that must get answered in any type of story. When telling a narrative story, writing a novel, I broke those 6 questions down into the 8 elements of story. I'm going to go over these 8 as fast as I can, or at least the first few as fast as I can, because the good stuff is toward the end of the list, and I want to have time for it. The more you can think about these 8 elements, the more you develop your idea, the more complete your story is going to be. And if you're going to be a writer, you're going to get excited about the brainstorming portion of it. Before you ever sit down and start writing Once Upon a Time and start knocking out scenes, you have already spent a long time thinking about your story, your characters, your world that you've created for your story. And you've put a lot of thought, a lot of planning into it, and it's all in this stage. And that's the fun stuff. That's the part you got to enjoy, okay? So I'm going to start with, this order is not necessarily set in stone, but this is the order kind of in which I made my decisions, okay? First thing is medium. Does anybody know what medium means in this context? It's the singular form of the word media, and it basically refers to the form of your presentation. Like, are you writing a book? Maybe you're producing a cartoon or a TV show, a movie, a stage play, a comic book, a poem, a painting. Whatever medium you choose, that's the format, the physical format, so to speak, the form of your presentation that you're going to use to tell your story. So, the important thing, though, is when you choose your medium, that you need to master the tools of that medium. You need to know what you're doing if you're going to operate in that realm. I operate in 2 different realms, primarily video and narrative writing. So, what are some of the basic tools of video production? Before I can tell these stories that you just saw, I had to know stuff about cameras and lighting, not just how to use them, but how to use them correctly with dramatic implication. What are the dramatic consequences for a certain choice, camera angles and composition and that type of thing. You can light something, but how do you light it to tell the story you're telling in that scene? So you got to have basic skills to tell a story in that medium. When it comes to narrative writing, what are the basic skills that you need? Anybody want to take a guess?
Imagination.
Well, you need imagination, and you need to have that. You need to have all the things I'm going to try to go over today. More basic than that. If you're going to write, what do you need in that? You need to know how to write. You need to have your basic language skills down. You need to understand that spelling, grammar, punctuation are important. They do matter. You can't just get it close and say, people know what I mean. That doesn't work. Okay? You've got to understand this. When you're writing, when a reader is reading your story, they need to have confidence that they're in the hands of a good writer. They need to know, they need to feel like you know what you're doing. Or else they're not going to stick with you to the end. They're not going to have confidence that the ending is going to be worth the time they're putting in. So they need to know that they want to feel like, they need to have confidence that you're a good writer. And if you've If you're casual with your spelling and your grammar and your punctuation and it's distracting, you're gonna lose it because no one's gonna think that you know what you're doing. So language skills, pay attention in English class. Now's the time to get those basic skills down. I would also add keyboarding to that. You gotta have good language skills and you gotta be able to type if you're gonna write a story. That's basic number one, before you can do anything else. Genre, what's the genre?
Like action, romance, different types of
The
books.
broad category of the type of story you're telling. It could be action, comedy, romance, western, science fiction. I write in fantasy, which it's a little, at first scan, that can be a little iffy for Christians. Specifically, and this is going to make Mr. Stewart nervous, I write in a subgenre called swords and sorcery. Now, the reason that might make you, it should make any discerning Christian nervous. Really, I would put up a little red flag. Because one thing I would say is, I love stories. Our culture is full of stories. 99+% of them are not stories we should be consuming. And I would say you need to be very careful of the type of stories you consume and make sure they're not doing anything to lead you away from God. So, the Bible actually has something specific to say about sorcery, in case you didn't know. I want to take a little bit of time and kind of defend my choice for genre, because I want you to understand that I do understand the scriptural space that I'm in when I start talking about a sword and sorcery book. Okay, so let me go ahead and read it since I have it up. 2 Kings 21:6. And he dealt with familiar spirits and wizards. He wrought much wickedness in the sight of the Lord to provoke him to anger. I mean, it's plain right there. It's wicked, and it makes the Lord angry. Galatians 5, verse 20, 21. You could start in 19. Idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like. A big list of sins there, right? Witchcraft is right there near the top. Like I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. So, the Bible has something to say about magic. And spoiler alert, magic is evil. So, I recognize that. And I knew when I was a kid, because I read Chronicles of Narnia when I was in 4th grade. I read The Lord of the Rings when I was in 6th grade, which was tough. I read Le Morte d'Arthur, which is the world's definitive collection of King Arthur legends from like the 1100s. I read that for fun when I was in junior high. What it made me was a fan of this genre. And I said then, I knew my medium and my genre. I wanted to write a fantasy book one day. And I spent 20 years not really thinking about it. Well, in the course of those 20 years, I got saved. And I became aware of why fantasy, swords and sorcery, can be problematic for Christians. And so I wanted to, that's where my story was. I leaned into that. So I take that little bit of tension there and I use that to tell my story. Is there room in the fantasy genre for Christians? And I set about to kind of prove that there is. I will maintain that my books do that. That's exactly what I set out to do. That was my goal. What inspired, so that was what compelled me that I needed to go ahead with this idea. The inspiration I found in Ephesians chapter 6, the passage about the armor of God. I don't have the whole passage written out here, but it refers to, you're probably all familiar with this, belt of truth, breastplate of righteousness, shield of faith, all of these. I got excited about that. That gave me my story idea at the beginning of my brainstorming session. Because I said, what if this armor of God is an actual suit of armor? I mean, I'm writing about knights and things like that. What if I could do something with this armor of God passage? So anyway, I just want you to know that I wanted to explain myself for the sword and sorcery genre, but also say we need to be discerning about the type of entertainment we consume. And I would encourage you, because there's so much out there that we shouldn't be a part of, we need Christians producing stories for the culture. So I would say find a way to use this stuff and affirm Scripture and honor God with all that you do. All right, we're going next to theme. Anybody want to guess what theme means? Yes, sir.
Like the message.
The message. It's not really, the plot is not what the story is about. The plot is what happens. The theme is what it's about. So it's the underlying messages that you want to convey. So, let's see. In my story, the themes of my story are forgiveness and salvation. What this means is these concepts are revisited in different ways by different characters throughout the whole story. In a 3-act structure, which I hope to get to before the day's over, you establish the theme early, and this is generally the realm in which your character is going to learn a lesson and be changed. And they're going to learn their lesson by the end of the book. It will revolve around your theme. The climax, the resolution, the big finish at the end of your book, that moment, clever moment that wins the day for the good guys, is probably going to hinge on something related to your theme. Now, themes, again, they can be God-honoring or they cannot. This applies to all types of stories. But what I would say is, even if you're not, you can write, my story shares the gospel message in it. You don't necessarily have to be that explicit with your Christian message, but at the very least, your theme should not be in opposition to Scripture. It's your underlying message. It's not just the message, it's the statement. It's not just the topic of what your underlying message is, it's the statement you make about it. What's the lesson your reader is going to take away from reading your story? Okay, that's your theme. The other thing that goes hand in hand with that is the tone. There are different ways to tell the same story. Okay, I have seen, we've got the Gospel of John movie at our house. It talks about, it depicts the crucifixion of Jesus. It does it in a serious way. It does it presented in a way for adults. We also have a little DVD cartoon that shows about Jesus' crucifixion. It's the same story, but it's a totally different treatment. They're intended for different audiences. So your tone is going to have a lot to do with who you're trying to reach. It's also, it could be funny. It could be scary. Your tone can affect these things. The other thing is you got to be careful of, and I'm thinking about broader picture beyond just Christians telling stories. Even if your theme is good, even if your theme might be in agreement with Scripture, let's say your theme is forgiveness or salvation. If your tone is vulgar, your message might still be ultimately good, but you have a secular, a worldly story. Okay, so I would say encourage you to keep your testimony and your theme and your tone together are going to have a lot to do with the type of story you tell. The Chronicles of Narnia and Harry Potter. You can name similarities between them, right? They're young English school kids, there's magic involved, and blah, blah, blah. I would say one is good for us to read. The other one I would encourage you to stay away from. So what's the difference between the two? Maybe you kind of tell there's a difference, but you can't articulate it. Well, the secret is this. The creators made different choices when it came to theme and tone. The difference between Narnia and Harry Potter is theme and tone. What is the message they're trying to get across? What are they affirming? What are they glorifying? And how are they presenting it? The tone of it. So your theme and your tone are going to shape your story. And I would say you got to get that right. Voice, real quick. I don't want to spend time on this. Voice is first person, second person, third person. As the writer, this is a choice you have to make. Common in the 19th century was to write in first person. All the Sherlock Holmes stories are in first person. I have War of the Worlds and King Solomon's Mines and probably some others. All from the 1800s, and they're all written in first person. It was common then. You can see it now, but it's much less common these days. Second person is an option. I don't know if I've ever seen a novel told in second person, where the narrator is basically talking to you. By far, the most common one is third person. Okay, you know what? Everybody understand what I mean by third person? Where you're saying he and him, she, her. But within that, you have another choice to make. Are you going to be writing in third person omniscient voice, or are you going to be writing in third person limited voice? And what that deals with is which characters or how many characters can the reader see their thoughts? As you're writing, what are you revealing to the reader? Third person omniscient, the reader is privy to what any character or every character in the scene is thinking or feeling or seeing. With third person limited, you're restricting the perspective or the point of view to just that one person. It can change from scene to scene, but within that scene, you're limited to that one person. I write in third person limited. Setting. You want to take a shot at setting? Okay. Setting, yes?
Like where you're at, what time period you're in.
Both are correct, yes. It's where your story takes place. It is also when your story takes place. It's a decision you've got to make. Now, maybe you're writing stuff in the real world, and this part's kind of easy. But if you're like me, you're writing in fantasy, you're probably having to come up with a whole new world. And this, I could do 30 minutes just on world building, okay? But the important thing there is if you're creating a new world, is to have internal consistency. You want to let the reader feel like that you're presenting a reality, and with internal consistency, they can begin to understand that world. Let me check my notes here real quick. I'll say one thing I wanted to say was give you a little insight in my brainstorming process for when I was writing my book. When it came to the setting, I knew early on that every good story starts with a what if question. And I thought to myself, what if you had like a Lord of the Rings type world, like a sword and sorcery world, but what if introduced into that world was the Word of God? What if somehow the Bible found its way into a world like that? What would that world be like? What would happen? And so I thought that would be kind of cool. I'll do a fantasy story, but it'll just have the Bible in it. So what kind of world is that? Well, then I realized something. The Bible mentions real-life places like Israel and Egypt, and Ethiopia, places like that. And I had to make a decision. You know, is my story going to have a book that's kind of like the Bible, but it's kind of different, and it's just for that world? Or is this going to be some fantasy version of Earth that has places like Israel and Egypt? And I decided no to both of those. And what I decided was this would be its own place, and then the Bible would find its way from our world to that world. And so I came up with a reason for that. And it's all backstory. It's not a part of the plot of my book. It all happens 200 years before chapter 1 opens. But these were decisions I had to make in creating my setting. And it's related. It's why you get the name Galahad. Does anybody know the name Galahad? Does anybody know where that name comes from? Okay. So Galahad was the name of one of King Arthur's knights. Knights of the Round Table. They went on a quest for the Holy Grail, which is not biblical, but it's a fun King Arthur story. The idea is they're looking for the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper. And only the most righteous and virtuous knight can find the cup. And everybody assumed that Sir Lancelot would be the one to find the Holy Grail. What they didn't know is that Lancelot had sinned in his life, and he was not able to find it. But his son was named Galahad, and he proved to be the most virtuous knight in the realm, and he found the Holy Grail. So I thought to myself, what if the Grail was not a cup? What if the Grail was a different type of vessel? What if it contained something else? What if this that they were questing for was actually the armor of God? And so that was just giving you a glimpse into my brainstorming process, is what if Sir Galahad had the armor of God, the literal suit of armor, and he had a Bible, and he found his way into this world that I've created, and there's actually a map here and everything, so it's a completely different world. And I answered all those questions. I fleshed it all out. And then I fast forwarded the clock 200 years, and I was like, what kind of world are they living in now? And so I wanted to get into a little bit of that. That's a little bit of my brainstorming process. It happened during the setting phase. To me, it's a lot more work in the fantasy realm, but it's also a lot more fun. Okay, so what else? Oh, I wanted to share this verse with you. When I was trying to come up with that dilemma of what to do about having the Bible in this world, how was I going to solve that? This verse just gave me inspiration. Hebrews 11:3. Through faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the Word of God. I love the use of the plural, worlds. And that just kind of freed me up creatively. I was like, okay, I can do this. You know, I can have another world that God still created. And the Word of God and the salvation message and the gospel message that happened on this world, the world of Adam, can still apply. Next one is character. Now I'm down to the last two, and this is where I wanted to spend my time. Character. The secrets I'm going to share with you in a minute have to do with story structure. And to me, that's fun. That's good stuff. When I learned that stuff, I got excited about writing, and I started turning out stories. But your readers aren't reading for your structure. Okay? They're reading for your characters. You got to be able to present characters, create characters that your readers are going to enjoy and they're going to want to read about. One way that I develop characters is I will do improv pieces. I'll improvise. I'll start writing without any worry about making sense to anybody else. I'll just start free-flowing ideas about a character, and I do it as a way to discover the character. What I mean is what you're looking for there is just, with each person you're looking for a distinct personality or a distinct view of the world, a personality core, anything that's going to make them distinctive. We're also a product of our past and our histories and our previous choices. So with every character, you kind of need to know what's happened before the story with that person. So you know who that character is. You want to bring your characters to life. Let me give you a little secret. Here's a little cheat code for writing characters. I would say you want to give your characters personality. You don't want them all to kind of be the same. Everybody speaks in a different way, right? I could give you 10 characters and 10 different ways of saying the same line of dialogue because everybody's different. You can base the personality of your characters on personalities of the people that you know. No, don't call them by the same name. Don't give them the same physical description. But if you're trying to figure out a way to give a character personality, base it on a real personality that you know. A character, your main character, is somebody that is going to need to learn a lesson over the course of their story. And it's going to be a lesson related to the theme. Okay, so every hero has some sort of flaw. They're not perfect. There's an area that needs to be fixed. There's a lesson they need to learn. Every bad guy is not completely irredeemable. There's always one little spark of good somewhere in there. If you're writing a good bad guy, a good villain for your story. So you need to think about this from character arc. If you've never heard that phrase before, you might want to write that down. Arc, A-R-C. A character arc is your character's personal story or personal journey within your larger story. Okay, so like you might have. My mind's blanking on examples right now, but you might have a big plot that has armies fighting each other, and the good country beats the bad country. Okay, but the character arc is what's your main character doing. For example, in my story, my main character's name is Galen. And Galen goes on a bit of a spiritual journey, and I decided to mirror it after my own. He starts in one place. He has certain thoughts and questions and influences and encounters, and he ends up in another place. His journey, his personal story, you need to be able to put aside the plot of the book and look at one character and what they go through, and if there's a complete story there with a change, with a transformation, that revolves around that theme, that's a character arc. And you want to make sure that you're, at the very least, that your main character has an arc like that, a lesson that's being learned. I'll tell you something that's kind of crazy. If you've developed your characters well enough to the point that you know them, and you know exactly what they're like and what they sound like, how they talk, how they think of the world, and you've done that with several, they truly can write themselves. Characters, you'll be amazed at how characters can kind of take over a story and start writing themselves. If you know your character well enough, you can set them loose in a scene, and they'll take care of the action and the dialogue for you. It happens. I promise you it does. It sounds weird, but it can happen. Also, they can surprise you. They can do things that you were not planning on them doing. I've had my story shaped by characters doing things I was not counting on. I was not planning. And sometimes they mess me up, and I get mad at them. And it changes my story. But the thing is, I know the characters, and I'm true to the character, and it forces me creatively to take the story in a different direction. Also, I mean, like at the end of this first book, there's a big scene. There's these two characters that are fighting. I don't want to give anything away. And then in a line of dialogue, someone says something that reveals a history, reveals information about a third character. That information that I didn't know. It told me so much more about that character. It made that character so much more interesting. And that excited me. And I was able to use that and inform the rest of my story. So this sounds crazy, but characters can surprise you. He's in a suit of armor. He's running away from bad guys. He needs to run down a pier and jump into the water and swim to a ship that's pulling away. And I had arranged the choreography of all this action. I had this big exciting escape take place. And he's running, and he gets all the way to the end of the pier. And at that moment, I realize that he can't swim because he's wearing all this metal on him. And the character recognized it because I recognized it. And suddenly he's stuck. Like, what do I do? The bad guys are chasing him. He's got nowhere to go. He was trapped, and I was right there with him. I didn't know what was going to happen. And honestly, I started writing like, let's just see what happens. And it just flows right out. It's just really exciting when a story can surprise you and when characters can start taking over. If that happens, you know that you've developed your characters well enough. You know that they're real people. I've got a little bit extra time. I want to spend some more time on characters. There's such a thing as a character archetype.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
So when you're doing a character like that, did you set out for these to be a trilogy?
Yes, I did.
Because sometimes you may start maybe you would start one book and expecting that to be an end to itself, but then the characters take you into another place.
Galen's journey, I spoke of his spiritual journey as his character arc. There's a complete story of that in just this one book. And if all you ever do is read this one book, you'll still feel like you got a complete story because of that reason. But I knew from the beginning that it would be a 3-book series because I was basing it on a 3-act structure that I'm going to get to here in just a minute. But in the process of writing, so I will plan out my structure and I will plan out my outline. But when it comes to actually writing the scenes, I'm just in the moment. I don't know what's going to happen. And through the course of writing 3 books, you start to, it feels more like information is being revealed to you rather than you just making it up out of your head. And all those type of details start working together and they inform the end of the story. So my 3rd book has got a lot of stuff in it that when I was writing this one, I had no idea was going to be there. Sure. And that's fun stuff. But when it can tie together, it all ties into the theme and it all informs the character arcs. Then it works. You stick the landing and it works. So I want to talk about archetypes. Usually you're going to find this in your supporting characters. Your main character is going to be your most well-developed character. It's going to be the one you know the most. You're going to feel like you know them the most. But anyone want to take a shot at what an archetype is? It's a broad category of a type of character that's going to serve a certain function in the story. So, for example, these don't occur in every story, but they are reoccurring. You can find multiple examples of them. So, for example, one archetype might be a herald. A herald is going to be some method of delivering new information to the main character early in the story, usually in an odd way or an unusual way. No, I say a herald, that might be some kind of person or an angel, and it might be, or it might come in some other form. But it's this delivery of a message at the beginning of the story that serves that herald function. Okay, so whether it's a hologram of Princess Leia saying you're my only hope, right? Or whether it's the white rabbit with the pocket watch running in front of Alice saying he's late, and makes her get up and follow him. These are examples of heralds. You also have mentors as an archetype. These are going to be the wise old teacher. This is going to be, it could be Obi-Wan Kenobi. It could be, who's the character in Lion King, Mufasa, right? The dad lion there. Superman has 2 fathers. He has his Kryptonian father and his earthly father. He's got Jor-El, he's got Jonathan Kent. They share the mentor role, okay? So what they're doing is they're serving the role of teachers to the hero. But here's what's interesting about mentors. They usually die, and they usually come back. Okay, so Obi-Wan dies, he came back. Mufasa came back. Gandalf came back. Jor-El came back when Superman puts the little crystal in the Fortress of Solitude and he gets a message from his dad. They die, and then they return in some fashion to impart additional wisdom. So all these characters, they're the same archetype. They're serving the same story function. And you're going to continue to see examples like that in storytelling. And you also have the sidekick. Okay, so whether you're talking about, Sebastian the Crab or R2-D2 or Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings, they're there. They're not the hero. They're a good friend of the hero, and they're usually there for comic relief. But also, they serve another function. The hero never quite can get it all done by himself. And it takes that little help from the sidekick to help them cross the finish line. So whether it's R2-D2 is helping with the targeting computer, or Sam is carrying Frodo up the mountain, the sidekick is there to kind of, when the hero is at his lowest and is most discouraged, the sidekick is there to help out. So I started learning about heralds and sidekicks and mentors and character archetypes, and I got really excited about just seeing the pattern of storytelling throughout human history. It's all there. If you were to do more study of story structure and storytelling, you'll see these reoccurring. They occur all the way back into classic myths. So now, plot. You've got your message. You know what you want to write about. You know what your message is going to be, your theme and your tone. You've got your character. You're really excited about your character. You have a couple of ideas of things that are going to happen, but it's not 300 pages. How do you or for a trilogy close to 1,000 pages? How do you decide what's going to happen? And it's got to be good, right? And it's got to engage the reader and interest them enough that they keep reading. And there's got to be a character arc. You got to see changes in the character. You want to see lessons learned. How do you do it? Like where do you start? So that's the stuff that I had to learn. Instinctively, I kind of knew this kind of stuff, but before I could write on my own, this is an area I really had to delve into and study. Like how to tell a story. So I write in a 3-act structure, and this to me this is the fun stuff. Okay, run out of time. I want to have time for questions, but the 3-act structure is your structure is the skeleton of your story. Okay, it's the framework you're going to build your story on. If you don't have a structure, your story's going to be a big mess. It's going to be unfocused. It's not going to be compelling. It's not going to be successful. People aren't going to be interested in it. At its simplest, the 3-act structure is what you see right here: beginning, middle, end. If you're going to tell a story, you got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. By the way, you don't always have to tell it in that order. I've seen stories that start in the middle and then go back and fill in the beginning, and that's cool too. But you've got to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. By the way, stories that do that are doing it for other structural reasons, probably related to the character arc, but I don't think I have time to get into that. So let's talk a little bit about Act 1. Act 1 is the introduction. And I knew that, for example, my entire first book would serve as the introduction. It introduces every major character you're going to need to know. It introduces every location, every concept you're going to need to know. It also introduces the rules you're working with. Okay, so I established early on, and this is largely, these expectations are largely set by the genre, but I'm going to have knights and castles and dragons and swords and all this kind of stuff, and elves and dwarves. You know, if you're reading a Western, you wouldn't expect to see those things. So as far as like the type of story you're telling, the type of world you're living in, the type of things that are possible in the world, that's all established in the first act. You can't change it after the first act. You're going to lose people. Okay? The Act 1 includes not only perhaps a herald bringing in new information, but it always includes an inciting incident. So inciting is spelled with an I. Inciting, I-N-C-I-T-I-N-G. Also, you can call this the catalyst. This is the moment. This is the thing that forces the hero into action. Before the inciting incident, at the beginning of your story, your hero is living in the known world. He's comfortable with where he is. He's just hanging out in the Shire, reading books all day. Or he's on the moisture farm with his aunt and uncle, just trying to get by on the desert planet. Okay, he's Peter Parker, he's a high school student, just hoping not to get laughed at that day. But he's in his own world, his known world. An inciting incident is going to start to change that. That's that where he's forced out of that comfort zone. He might get bitten by a radioactive spider. His aunt and uncle might be killed by stormtroopers. Okay, Ariel might be swimming along enjoying herself under the sea, and then the ship wrecks, and she has to save Eric. Is that his name? And she begins to realize that there's more out there. So, or Alice decides to chase the white rabbit. The known world, some people also call this the thesis world. Okay, it just kind of establishes what we know. There's an inciting incident that begins the journey. Okay, but there's always a call to action. And by the way, in a 3-act structure, you're going to have rising action and falling action. You don't want it all at the same level, even if it's up high. You don't want it like that the whole time. You wear people out. So you, at the end of each act, it builds to a climax. There's rising action that reaches the end of that act, and then it will kind of fall down and rebuild. At Act 1, the climax at the end of Act 1 is going to be that moment of no return. So the hero crosses a threshold and leaves the known world. He goes into the unknown world. Okay, where Act 1 is the introduction, Act 2 is the complication. And they are crossing the point of no return. They are now they're now in this thing, whether they wanted to be or not. Okay, so now Luke's on the Falcon, and he's left the planet that he's always lived on. He's in outer space. Where in the world is he going? Okay, so Peter Parker discovers he's got superpowers. What's this about? Frodo leaves the Shire. Well, hobbits don't like adventure, but now he's leaving the Shire and being chased by bad guys. What's happening? There's no going back. Okay, so there is something that happens at the end of Act 1 that's the culmination of rising action and puts the hero in a position where there's no going back. He's going to have to complete this journey. I can't wait for y'all to see what that is in the end of this first book, which, by the way, allows the book to stand on its own. Okay, because that climactic scene at the end, you feel like, even though you haven't read parts 2 and 3 yet, you still feel like you've got a good story there. So you enter the unknown world, which is also, I call it the antithesis world. That's probably pronounced antithesis. So everything the hero thought he knew about the world is now flipped upside down. He's unsure of anything else. So Act 2 is generally the longest act of the 3-act structure. It's generally the darkest. This is where the bad guys start winning. It's also the promise of the premise. I'll expand on both of those. Act 2 is where the fun stuff happens. Like if you want to read a science fiction story, you probably are reading a science fiction story because you want to see a lot of space battles and you want to see aliens fighting each other. Well, Act 2 is where you're going to get all that stuff. Maybe you want to see armies of knights and elves fighting a bunch of monsters. This is where you're going to get that. Right? These are all the action sequences that you think of when you think of a story. It's all in the books I've read on story structure call this the fun and games, or the promise of the premise. You've promised your audience a certain experience by how you've marketed the book and the type of genre you've chosen. And now this is where you get all that stuff. This is all character stuff. And here's where oh, by the way, Act 1, I should go back and mention, Act 1 is also where you establish what needs fixing, or what the character flaw is that needs to be addressed. What is the lesson that needs to be learned? Okay, and by the way, that's directly connected to your theme. In Act 2, so Act 1, you put your hero in a tree. Act 2, you throw rocks at him. And in Act 3, you get him down from the tree. Okay, introduction, complication, resolution. Beginning, middle, and end. So, all right, so you had the known world. You got flipped upside down by the unknown world. But then, in order to win the day, so by the way, the end of Act 2, that's usually where the heroes lose. The bad guys are usually winning at the end of Act 2. The big fight at the end of Act 2, probably something really bad happens to our heroes. It looks like the bad guys are going to win. You've taken all hope away. You're doing everything you can to convince your reader there's no way the good guys can possibly win. How in the world can they come back from this? Well, in Act 3, that hero starts to apply lessons that he's learned. He takes the known world, the unknown world, he synthesizes them into a new world. Okay, so now, so my character, book 1, he's a soldier in the army. Book 2, he's a knight in the church. In book 3, he's got to be both. He's got to be a soldier and a servant. He's got to be fighting for his king's army, but also serving the Creator. So that's one example that I can give. You've got to, where the hero started, what the hero was forced to face and learn about through the complications of Act 2. apply those lessons to what he knows, and his character arc is completed. He's transformed into a different type of character. And in that third act, with his new perspective, with that problem solved, with the lesson learned, he's able to come from behind and win the day. So that's your 3-act structure. I wish I had another 30 minutes. There's your 8 elements. Real quick, any questions, comments? Yes?
For the character archetype, can we have more than one archetype?
Yes. I'm going to use R2-D2. R2-D2 and C-3PO serve as heralds at the beginning of the first movie. They're walking across the desert and they have a little holograph message they need to send. That's the first thing Luke learns about the greater world out there. R2 also serves as a sidekick for Luke throughout the series. So he's there for comic relief, and he's there to help him get over the finish line. So absolutely, they can serve more than one function. It's a good question. I've got a lot here. I can talk about the actual process and workflow of writing. I don't have time to get into it. There's a lot more that happens after you've written. You got to know how to work with an editor. You got to know how to work with test readers. You got to work on your artist, your cover art. Real quick, I'm going to fly through these, okay? A real glimpse at the creative process behind my cover. I hired somebody to do this for me. He worked digitally, which means he worked very quickly. He's in Michigan. I've never met him. But I'm chatting with him, and I'm telling him what I don't like and the changes he's making. He starts off with that character. Already, I felt like, oh, this is good. This guy can draw. I like it. This is the second character. And I saw that, and I said, you know what? That posture is not right. So I'm already making storytelling decisions about this cover image. What I know about the story and about these characters is going to inform how they're depicted on the cover. I was like, he needs to slouch a little bit. And so, I don't know if y'all can see that one. So he put a little bit of a hunch in there. He put his head down. I would have gone for more, but I mean, that's better. And he started dressing him up a little bit. I said, can we move that sword to the near hand? He's like, sure, no problem. We can do that. Then he creates a 3D image of a background, because I knew I wanted a castle. Obviously, the castle's temporary there. He just threw a shape up there. But I felt like the characters were too small. The castle